Okay, so pharmacokinetics sounds intimidating, right? It's actually a really simple idea once you strip away the jargon. Here's the trick. Pharmacokinetics is just the story of what your body does to a drug from the moment it goes in to the moment it's completely gone. Think of it in 4 chapters. First, absorption. The drug gets into your bloodstream. Second, distribution. Your blood carries it around your body into your organs, your brain, wherever it needs to go. Third, metabolism. Your liver gets to work breaking it down. And fourth, excretion. Your kidneys flush out what's left. Absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. ADME, that's it. That's pharmacokinetics. And here's why it actually matters for your exam. Every single pharmacokinetic property you'll ever be asked about, half-life, bioavailability, clearance, all of it fits into one of these 4 boxes. So once this map is in your head, everything else just slots into place. So, absorption. Chapter 1 of the drug's journey. You swallow a tablet, it dissolves, it gets absorbed. Sounds simple, but here's the twist. When you take a tablet orally, it doesn't go straight into your main bloodstream. It's absorbed through your gut wall, but then it travels through a vessel called the portal vein, and that vein takes it straight to the liver first, before it's allowed anywhere else in the body. And the liver isn't gentle. It's sitting there with enzymes ready to break drugs down. So by the time the drug finally escapes and reaches general circulation, a chunk of it is already gone. We call this first-pass metabolism. Now here's where bioavailability comes in. Bioavailability simply means how much of the drug you took actually makes it into your bloodstream, ready to work. So if a drug has 60% bioavailability, that's the direct result of first-pass metabolism. It's telling you that 40% of the dose got broken down by the liver before it ever reached your blood. And that's the relationship in one line. The more first-pass metabolism a drug undergoes, the lower its bioavailability. They're not 2 separate ideas. Bioavailability is basically the scorecard for how much the gut wall and liver took away. Right, 3 terms that show up constantly in exams, and honestly, once you see the graph, they're easy. Picture a drug going into the blood after a patient takes a tablet. The level rises, 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 until it hits its highest point. That highest point is called Cmax, the peak level the drug ever reaches in the blood. Now how long did it take to get there? That's Tmax. The time it takes to reach that peak. So Tmax and Cmax always go together. Tmax is the when, Cmax is the how much. After the peak, the level starts falling as the body clears the drug. That's where half-life comes in. The time it takes for the drug level to drop by half. So if the level is at 100 units and the half-life is 12 hours, then 12 hours later it's at 50. Another 12 hours it's at 25. Now here's the part that ties it all together. Does how fast a drug is absorbed change any of this? Actually, it changes 2 out of 3. Absorb it fast like an IV, and the drug floods in quickly. It hits its peak sooner, so Tmax is shorter, and because it's arriving all at once rather than trickling in, that peak is also higher. Cmax goes up. Slow it down like a modified release tablet, and it's the opposite. It trickles in gradually, so Tmax is longer, and because it never floods in all at once, Cmax is lower. But half-life stays exactly the same either way. Half-life isn't about how the drug got in, it's about how the liver and kidneys clear it out. So no matter how fast or slow the absorption, the half-life doesn't change. Okay, chapter 2 of the drug's journey, distribution. The drug has made it into the blood, so job done? Not quite. Being in the blood doesn't mean it's actually working yet, it still has to get to where it's needed. Here's the key mechanism you need to know. Once a drug is in the blood, a portion of it sticks to plasma proteins, mainly albumin. We call this bound drug. And bound drug is basically parked, too big and stuck to squeeze out of the blood vessel, so it can't do anything yet. Now why does the body even have plasma proteins doing this? They're not just getting in the way, they actually have a real job. Plasma proteins act like a reservoir or a buffer. As free drug gets used up, metabolized, excreted, or working at its target, some of the bound drug detaches and tops up the free drug level again. This keeps the amount of active drug in the blood more steady over time, instead of crashing suddenly. Different proteins even specialize in different drugs. Albumin mainly binds acidic drugs, alpha-1 acid glycoprotein mainly binds basic drugs. So depending on the chemistry of the drug, it'll preferentially bind to one or the other. The rest of the drug, the part that isn't bound, is free drug. And free drug is the only part that actually matters clinically because it's small enough and mobile enough to cross the capillary wall and reach the tissue where it's needed. So think of plasma proteins like a slow-release tank. Bound drug is stored there, and it's steadily topped up into the active free pool as needed. rather than everything hitting the tissue all at once. Now, how far a drug spreads once it's free also depends on its chemistry. Lipophilic drugs push out into fatty tissue all over the body, a large volume of distribution. Hydrophilic drugs stay closer to the bloodstream, a much smaller volume of distribution. Now let's talk about the brain specifically, because getting into the brain is harder than getting anywhere else in the body. The brain is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier. Basically, the cells lining the brain's blood vessels are sealed together really tightly, almost no gaps. So the brain gets to be picky about what it lets in. There are 3 ways a drug can get through. First, passive diffusion. If a drug is fat-loving, lipophilic, it can just slip straight through the wall on its own. No help needed, no energy used. This is how most psychiatric drugs get into the brain. Second, active transport. Some things the brain needs, like glucose, can't slip through on their own, they're too polar. So there's a carrier protein sitting in the wall that grabs onto it and physically carries it across. This costs the body energy to do. And third, the one people forget, efflux pumps, specifically P-glycoprotein or PGP. Here's the twist. The drug actually gets in fine, but then PGP grabs it from the inside and pumps it straight back out before it ever reaches the brain. So a drug can look perfectly capable of crossing and still barely make it into the brain because it keeps getting kicked back out. And here's the key bit, this only happens to certain drugs. PGP is picky about which molecules it recognizes. So 2 drugs can be equally fat-loving, and one gets into the brain easily while the other keeps getting pumped straight back out. So we've talked about how the drug gets absorbed and how it spreads through the body. Now, what actually happens when it hits the liver? First, how does it even get there? If the drug was taken orally, it's absorbed from the gut and travels through the hepatic portal vein, straight to the liver, before anywhere else in the body. Once it arrives, metabolism happens inside the liver's main cells, hepatocytes, specifically inside a structure called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Metabolism happens in 2 phases. Phase 1 modifies the drug's structure, and there are 3 ways this happens. Oxidation. This adds oxygen to the molecule or strips away electrons. Reduction. The opposite, adding electrons or hydrogen back onto the molecule. And hydrolysis. This one uses water to literally split the molecule apart into 2 smaller pieces. Sometimes this makes the drug inactive. Sometimes, and this catches people out, it actually makes the drug more active, or turns an inactive prodrug into its active form. Phase 2 is conjugation. The liver attaches a chemical group like glucuronic acid or a sulfate group onto the drug or its phase 1 product. This makes the molecule much more water-soluble, so the kidneys can actually get rid of it. So the whole point of liver metabolism, in one sentence, turn a fat-soluble drug the kidneys can't easily remove into a water-soluble one they can. So the liver has just finished metabolizing the drug. It's now more water-soluble, ready to leave the body. But first, how does it actually get out of the liver? It exits through the hepatic vein. This is different from the vein that brought it in. Remember, blood arrived at the liver via the portal vein from the gut, but it leaves via the hepatic vein, which drains straight into the inferior vena cava, the big vein carrying blood back to the heart. From there, it's pumped out into general circulation, and now the drug is free to travel anywhere in the body, including to the kidneys for the next stage. From here, there are 2 possible exit routes: the kidney, or straight back through the liver via bile. Let's start with the kidney. This happens inside a tiny filtering unit called the nephron in 3 steps. Step 1, filtration. At the glomerulus, a tiny tangle of capillaries acting like a sieve. Step 2, secretion, at the proximal tubule, where transporter proteins actively add extra drug into the fluid. Step 3, reabsorption, where lipophilic drug can slip back through the tubule wall into the blood. Now the other route, the liver itself. Some metabolites never even go to the kidney. Instead, the liver actively excretes them into bile. That bile flows into the gut, and sometimes gut bacteria reactivate the drug there, letting it slip back into the blood instead of leaving in feces. That's enterohepatic recirculation. So to recap, drug leaves the liver via the hepatic vein into systemic circulation, then exits the body either through the kidney, filtered, secreted, sometimes reabsorbed, or through the liver again via bile, sometimes recycled by the gut. So far we've talked about drugs going through the liver before being excreted, but some drugs barely touch the liver at all, and that's not random. There's a clear reason why. Here's what minimal hepatic metabolism actually means. The liver's CYP450 enzymes barely modify the drug. it leaves the body in nearly the same chemical form it entered in. Why does this happen for some drugs and not others? It comes down to one property: polarity. Remember, the whole point of liver metabolism is to take a fat-soluble drug and make it water-soluble enough for the kidney to filter out. But if a drug is already polar enough in its original form, the kidney can just filter it out directly. There's no need for the liver to do any converting first. Amisulpride is a perfect example. It's already polar enough in its original form, so it skips significant liver processing and heads straight to the kidney, where about half the dose is filtered out completely unchanged. Quetiapine is the opposite. It's lipophilic in its original form, too fat-soluble for the kidney to filter efficiently, so it has to go through the liver first, where CYP3A4 adds polarity to it before it's water-soluble enough for the kidney or gut to finish the job. So the rule is simple: if a drug starts out polar, it can skip the liver and go straight to the kidney. If it starts out lipophilic, the liver has to convert it first. So we've talked about how most psychiatric drugs get processed by the liver. But here's a short list worth memorizing. The exceptions. First group: drugs that skip liver metabolism almost entirely and go straight to the kidney, unchanged. Lithium is the classic one, purely renally excreted, no liver involvement at all. Gabapentin and pregabalin are the same story. And from the antipsychotic side, amisulpride, sulpiride and paliperidone all fall here too. Second group: drugs that do touch the liver but only lightly. These undergo phase 2 conjugation only, meaning no 450 cypriot pounds involvement at all. That matters clinically because phase 2 reactions stay relatively preserved even when the liver is damaged, like in cirrhosis. This is why lorazepam, oxazepam and temazepam are the go-to benzodiazepines in patients with liver disease. Topiramate is similar. About 80% of it leaves the body completely unchanged. And here's a memory trick: LOT, lorazepam, oxazepam, temazepam. If a STEM describes choosing a benzodiazepine for a patient with liver failure, LOT is your answer. 2 ways the body clears a drug. Let's keep it simple. Most drugs the body clears the same percentage every hour. High level, more gets cleared. Low level, less gets cleared. Same slice every time. That's first order, and because of this, half-life stays the same, always. A few drugs are different. The body can only clear a fixed amount every hour no matter how much is there. That's zero order. Why? The enzyme clearing the drug is maxed out. It can't go any faster. And this matters because with zero order, half-life isn't fixed anymore. It keeps getting longer. So a tiny dose increase can suddenly cause a big jump in levels. That's dangerous. 2 examples to remember: alcohol cleared at a steady rate no matter how much you drank, and phenytoin at higher doses the enzyme gets overwhelmed, switches to zero order, and a small dose bump can suddenly cause toxicity. Here's the bit that confuses people: why does half-life stay exactly the same no matter what the starting level is? Remember, first order means the body always clears the same percentage, not the same amount, the same percentage. Let's use round numbers. Say the half-life is 10 hours and 50% gets cleared every 10 hours. Start at 100. After 10 hours 50% is gone. You're left with 50. After another 10 hours 50% of that 50 is gone. So you lose 25, leaving 25. After another 10 hours 50% of 25 is gone. You lose 12.5, leaving 12.5. Notice something? The time it took to halve 10 hours never changed. What changed was the amount lost each time. First it lost 50, then 25, then 12.5. Because it's always losing the same fraction of whatever's currently there, not a fixed number. The halving time stays locked at 10 hours forever, no matter how high or low the level starts. That's the whole trick. Fixed percentage means fixed halving time. Let's really nail down why this switch happens, because once you see it this way it's obvious. Picture the liver enzyme as a small team of workers. Each worker can process one drug molecule at a time. When there's not much drug around, low concentration, some workers are free just waiting. So as more drug arrives, more workers pick it up and the amount cleared scales with how much drug is there. That's why it comes out as a fixed percentage. The workforce keeps pace with demand. This is first order. Now turn the dose up. More and more drug arrives, more and more workers get grabbed, until eventually every single worker is busy. There's nobody left to pick up the extra drug. This is called saturation. Once every worker is occupied, it doesn't matter how much more drug shows up. The team can only process as many molecules as there are workers, full stop. So the amount cleared becomes fixed, a hard ceiling, no matter how high the concentration climbs. That's zero order. So the switch isn't magic. It's simply, are there free workers or are they all busy? Free workers percentage-based, first order, all workers busy, maxed out, fixed amount, zero order. And as the dose keeps falling afterward, workers become free again, and it switches right back to first order. Now here's why this switch actually matters clinically, and it comes down to a distinction between two things that sound the same but aren't. Concentration and drug exposure. Concentration is just a snapshot, how much drug is in the blood at one specific moment. Drug exposure, what we measure as AUC, is different. It's concentration and time combined, not just how high the level got but how long it actually stayed there. Here's why that matters for zero order. Once the enzyme is saturated, it's not just that concentration goes a bit higher, it's that concentration stays high for much longer because the enzyme physically can't clear it any faster. And when the level lingers at a high point for longer, drug exposure doesn't rise a little, it balloons. So a tiny dose increase in a zero-order drug like phenytoin doesn't cause a tiny increase in exposure. It can cause a massive one because the drug isn't just a bit higher, it's high for far longer too. That's exactly why zero-order drugs are so dangerous. The body has lost its ability to keep pace, and drug exposure spirals upward far faster than the dose itself did. So which psychiatric drugs are first order? Honestly, almost all of them. Antipsychotics, antidepressants, benzodiazepines, lithium, lamotrigine, all first order. This is just the normal default way drugs behave in the body. Why? Because at standard therapeutic doses, the enzyme, or the kidney for renally cleared drugs, always has spare capacity. It's never working flat out, so as drug levels rise or fall, clearance scales proportionally. That's exactly what gives you a fixed percentage and a nice predictable half-life. So instead of memorizing a huge list, flip the question around. When does a drug stop being first order? Only when the enzyme clearing it gets completely overwhelmed, maxed out, working as fast as it possibly can. Two drugs you must know for this: phenytoin and alcohol. Phenytoin behaves normally at low doses, but push the dose up and its enzyme gets saturated. It switches to zero order, and suddenly even a tiny dose increase can cause toxicity. Alcohol is zero order pretty much from the start. Your body clears it at a steady fixed rate no matter how much you drink. So the exam trick: don't try to remember which drugs are first order. Just remember the couple that aren't, phenytoin and alcohol, and assume everything else follows the normal rule.